At the end of last year, I noticed my subscription feed on YouTube was almost entirely white guys, and I had an adverse reaction. There's nothing wrong with watching white guys, of course. It would be pretty hypocritical of me to upload this video if that were the case. What was I missing out on? I mean, white men are not uniquely qualified to make good YouTube videos, so how did it end up like this? And what should I do about it? This video is my journey to answer those questions. And I hope you'll join me because, as it turns out, I was missing out on some great content. After pondering the situation for a few days, I realized the problem was Jon Stewart. I mean, not the man himself, obviously. I remembered an interview he did where he described his failure to notice the lack of diversity among job candidates for The Daily Show.
Pretty much an all-white staff, all-white correspondents, mostly male. You know, there was an article written, there weren't enough women writers, and I was sexist. And I was like, sexist? And I remember going back into the writer's room and saying, you believe this shit? Kevin, Steve, Mike, Bob, Donald? Oh. Uh-oh.
His oversight, and mine, was a failure to notice the lack of diversity being presented to him.
But we still kept just hiring white dudes. White dudes from a certain background. And what we realized is the material, the river that we were getting the material from, the tributary, was also polluted by the same inertia. And you had to say to them, send me women. Send me Black people.
My frustration, in hindsight, came from the fact that I had listened to him saying all this, nodded along in agreement, and then made the exact same kind of mistake. YouTube showed me a bunch of white guys making videos I wanted to watch, and I did. I watched them. I didn't question it. I didn't ask why so many white men were winning the algorithm to end up in my feed. Allow me to draw your attention to these embarrassing graphs. My subscription list going into January 2024 was 90% male and 92% white. The intersection white guys made up 85% of the channels. If that sounds bad, it is bad. Aside from the obvious fact that roughly half the global population, aren't men, my subscriptions would have been whiter than 46 out of 50 US states, falling just shy of Maine, Vermont, Wyoming, and West Virginia. Even whiter than the state of my birth, Kansas. And as someone who grew up there, I can tell you, it's pretty white. I knew that I had to do something, so I concocted a plan that would leave me with no choice but to do the hard work. This isn't a kid's show from the 90s. You can't just add in a bunch of token diversity and call it a day. I unsubscribed from everyone that wasn't a white guy. I wrote down everyone who was let go so I could add them back later if I wanted to. No, it's not you. You're great. Please, it's not you. I know this is going to sound cliche, but it's me, okay? Yeah. No, listen, I need to work on myself, okay? Where are you going? What do you mean the glass is empty? Then I established the following rules for the month of January. Number 1, I wasn't allowed to watch any entertainment content on YouTube that wasn't in my subscription feed. Number 2, I wasn't allowed to subscribe to any white guys, obviously. Number 3, I wasn't allowed to reduce my watch time in order to avoid searching for new content. With these rules in place, I set to work finding new creators on my own rather than letting YouTube do it for me. That sounds great, but there's still a giant elephant in the room. Who exactly is a white guy? After giving it considerable thought, I came up with the elevator test. Basically, if I spent an elevator ride with a person, would I assume they benefit from both male privilege and white privilege? If the answer is yes, they're a white guy. Revolutionary stuff, I realize. I know what you're thinking. Isn't that a bit binary in an increasingly non-binary world? Isn't being cisgendered and conforming to gender norms also a form of privilege? I mean, yes. But not all creators advertise their sexual identity or orientation, especially if it doesn't have anything to do with their content. It isn't about what a person is, but rather what they are not. I'm trying to diversify away from people who benefit from the same privileges that I do. In that spirit, the elevator test works well enough for YouTubers, People like me just making videos at home. However, let's consider 2 channels I was subscribed to before I started doing this. What do I do about Mr. Who's the Boss? Aaron is a 2nd-generation British Indian, but his team is just 10 white guys in a trench coat? Or consider some more news. Katie is an equal partner, appears in most episodes, and sometimes hosts the show. And Warmbo can't be categorized by the known laws of physics.
The deep state is trying to control Wombo and Wombo's friends with 6G.
I decided that Aaron got to stay because it's his channel. His team helps him make the videos, but they're still his videos. Cody and Katie are out because he's the main face of it. There's no Cody Shody without Cody. You might disagree with my choices, but that's also kind of the point. I mean, there's no perfect test for something like this. Race and gender are social constructs. People have different skin tone, different anatomy, but what it means to be white and who gets to be white, what it means to be a woman and who gets to be a woman, those are things dictated by our culture. Here's a question. Why does any of this matter again? YouTube does not care what you're watching or why you watch it. They just care about selling you ads. There are almost no gatekeepers on YouTube. Anyone can tell their story, which is great, and nobody will stop you from listening. There's one small problem though. You see, there's no gatekeepers, and anyone can tell their story, and no one's going to stop you from listening. At least with traditional media, we can question the decisions they make about what diversity they include or not include, but YouTube doesn't make its own content. We make the content. With over 500 hours of video added every minute, and the rate has probably gone up since the last time they gave us a figure, YouTube's role is more like a librarian than a publisher. You're never going to see everything on YouTube, regardless of how much you look or how specific your searches are. There's just too much of it. Thousands of hours of video have been uploaded since you started watching this video. In the time it would take you to look through all of it and decide if any of it was something you wanted to watch, many thousands more would be uploaded. YouTube may not serve as a gatekeeper, but it does serve as a de facto tastemaker, and unfortunately, there's just not much we can do about it. If the tributaries are poisoned, as Jon put it, then it's worth considering how the fire hose of new videos that get added every minute gets sorted in such a way that almost nothing but white guys came out the other end and onto my screen. You might be starting to think that YouTube is solely to blame, and it's easy to see why, but it's more complicated than that. Let's explore 4 possible reasons. Is the algorithm to blame? Well, sort of. There isn't just one algorithm on YouTube, and they do change over time. Different social media companies all have their own versions that optimize engagement for their business model, but they all have the same problem. The modern internet runs on the attention economy. Much like the fixed stomach described by Michael Pollan in The Omnivore's Dilemma, a person only has so much attention they can give, since there's only 24 hours in a day. The question of how to sell more food to a person who isn't hungry isn't significantly different from the question of how to show more ads to a person who's already viewing ads all day. I don't think YouTube understands or incorporates demographic data about creators when making recommendations, but it does consider what other people with similar watch history to yours ended up watching next. The audience for most YouTube channels looks like the person making the video. Social psychology refers to this as the affinity bias, or the similar to me effect among other names. Men watch men, women watch women, white people watch white people, you get the idea. YouTube obviously doesn't provide their data, but given that affinity bias is an academically accepted phenomenon and lots of anecdotal evidence exists, it's safe to say that it's probably prevalent on the platform. If you watch nothing but videos of white guys, the audience of which is mostly white guys who click on recommendations of videos of white guys, it's going to recommend you more videos of white guys. That's just how it works. It doesn't need to be explicitly told to do this. It's emergent behavior. So, If white men are watching white men and black women are watching black women, what exactly are we teaching it? What role did my choices play in how my subscription feed ended up? Clearly, it did play some part, or the actions I've taken to diversify would have had no effect. But they have. The platform does have its shortcomings, but it tries to give us what it thinks we want. As far as it was concerned, I never wanted anything else. Let's get real for a minute. YouTube is not a cheap hobby. Women often lament that the effort it takes to make it look like you haven't made an effort is pretty big.
If you're rocking the little to no makeup with some chapstick.
In what universe do men think that that's actually no makeup?
The same is true for YouTube. The minimum expected production value has gotten quite high, and providing that takes time and money, both of which are luxuries that are disproportionately enjoyed by white men due to both racial wealth inequality and the cultural expectation for women to spend their free time doing domestic labor. I'm recording this on my phone, and yet I've spent over $1,000 on microphones, lights, a green screen, a gimbal, and other gear and software. Not to mention that I have an expensive phone with good cameras and a computer capable of doing heavy editing. If I didn't, I'd have to spend money on those things too. That's only half the story. You also need a lot of time, and time is a luxury. The more you have to work to make ends meet, the less time you have for hobbies, and the more exhausted you'll be when you do have time. You also need to learn a cornucopia of skills, including video editing, audio mixing, thumbnail design, just to name a few. It might be possible to grow a following with a cheap phone, some charm, and a lot of tenacity, but it's a hell of a lot easier when you have more resources. Could also be circumstances. I speak English and watch videos in English, which is going to skew wider than the global average for obvious reasons. I also have hobbies and interests that tend to be male-dominated, such as video games. Try to contain your shock. Unless I learn Mandarin or take up different hobbies, these sorts of biases are baked into the culture and should influence expectations about what a healthy level of diversity looks like for a given niche on YouTube. I want to highlight 8 creators I found this year who make incredible content, and I hope you'll stay and check them out. So I'm going to give you one video recommendation each, as well as telling you a little bit about them. These are in no particular order. First up is Faria Faraji, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's an Iranian musician and historian who makes reconstructions of historical music, as well as producing video essays about music culture and historical music history. I recommend Orientalism, desert-level music versus actual Middle Eastern music, a video about how Western composers have created an entirely new genre of music for depicting the Middle East in Western media that's nothing like the actual music of the region. A highly entertaining video that is educational and offers a different perspective on music theory than you'd normally see on YouTube. Next is Elijah Limerd, a relative newcomer who exploded on YouTube with his video, "I Actually Tried the Free Vacation No One Dares to Take." Elijah and his girlfriend endure a timeshare presentation to get the claimed free trip they advertise to get you in the door. Their experience of trying to claim that free trip is charming and entertaining. Next is Alice Capel. I would first point you to her book, Collapse Feminism, the ideas of which are sprinkled into many of her videos, so I'll point you to How Liberal Feminism Turns into Fascism. To paraphrase my favorite point that she makes, transgressional feminism is not a solution in itself. In Iran, women aren't allowed to take off their hijab. In France, they aren't allowed to put it on. Doing the opposite of what is expected looks like activism and is activism, but it was never about the hijab. It's about separating people using gender essentialism to create a hierarchy of power where men always come out on top, conveniently. Next is Mooncat, who makes long-form video essays debunking scams, grifts, and nonsense. I Debunked Evolutionary Psychology is over 3 hours of takedowns against the questionable subject of evolutionary psychology, a legitimate-looking haven for both regressive academics like Jordan Peterson, who use it to put a nice sweater on their beliefs and rocket fuel for an entire grift economy of manosphere nonsense. A professor turned YouTuber, Zoe B, makes video essays about society and culture. In Plagiarism and the Death of the Video Essay, Zoe talks about how nebulous the concept of plagiarism is and why the goal shouldn't be to merely punish offenders, but to reduce the incentives to cheat and engender a culture of honesty and best practices. And you better believe I used the advice she gives in that video for doing the description for this video. Shane Spear makes video essays about pop culture and society. Disney, Race Bending, and Whimsical Racism is a video about how Hollywood whitewashing and blackface in the early days of cinema and more recent blackwashing, casting actors of color in traditionally white roles, are all motivated by corporate profit rather than accuracy to source material. When modern audiences complain about these casting decisions, ostensibly for the sake of authenticity, it's ironic since they are only pretending to care about it as well in order to cover for their racism. Hannah Alonso is an excellent series called Influencer Insanity. I recommend The Stanley Cup Phenomenon, Why People Are Losing Their Minds. You guys remember Stanley Cups, right? When hordes of white women were fighting to the death at their local Target in order to buy a leaky $50 cup while their preteen daughters were recreating Lord of the Flies at the Sephora across the street. I mean, that's how I remember January. Her videos are well researched and organized and do a great job of breaking down the topics she covers. Of the millions of Stanley Cup videos out there, she has one of my favorites. Last, but certainly not least, is Gabby Bell. She's hilarious and makes entertaining videos on pop culture and trends that are often not what you'd find on other channels. Despite having a whole series of bingeable videos about Gordon Ramsay and ancient aliens, I'll draw attention to the most chaotic restaurant in America, Waffle House, which covers a lot of the unique things that make Waffle House such a compelling spectacle. She even wrote and produced an entire country song just for the video, and it's absolutely a delight. When I started this project, my subscription list was 92% white and 90% male. My current subscription list is 72% white and 55% male, a change of 20 percentage points and 35 percentage points respectively. I have 3 quick thoughts about this. First, it's difficult to know what an ideal breakdown should look like given all the factors we've discussed so far. Second, I'm not trying to meet a quota. I'm just trying to be a more thoughtful consumer of my media. Third, this is an ongoing process. It's going to keep changing, as it has during the making of this video and the writing of the script. Social media has provided us with unprecedented freedom of expression by removing traditional gatekeepers. People complain about the woke agenda enveloping movies, TV shows, and games. You know, because a woman has a chin or something. They claim it's ruining their favorite franchises. The very diversity they abhor might be shallow and insincere, but at least it exists. YouTube has no such safeguards. It will happily show angry men exactly what they want 24 hours a day. An endless parade of white guys with bespoke recommendations after every video. Did you enjoy this white guy telling you things? Then you might also enjoy this white guy telling you things. The good news is that we can use the system to our advantage. I frequently get recommendations for women and people of color that I never would have gotten last year. But I had to force the algorithm to show them to me by searching for them and watching them. It's just like Jon said, if you ask for it, you'll get it. But you have to ask.
And all of a sudden, women got funny. Just kind of happened. But they've been funny all along. We just hadn't actively done enough to mine that.
But then again, what do I know? I'm just a white guy on YouTube. Gonna cut this part cause I'm waiting on the teleprompter, cause I'm not gonna include that paragraph, yeah.